Hey there. It's wonderful to be here in London. It's been a minute since I've been here, and I always love visiting. I want to thank Sonos for bringing me here, and also to the Vinyl Factory, which is amazing if you don't know it already. It's a whole scene around vinyl culture online and in the real world, who've been greatly supportive as well. So, 40 years ago, NASA launched two spacecraft, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, on a grand tour of the solar system and into the mysteries of interstellar space. Attached to each of those probes is a beautiful golden phonograph record. You can see it right there. That's actually the cover. The record's inside. And it contains a message for any extraterrestrial intelligence that might encounter it now or perhaps even billions of years from now. The Voyager Golden Record is both an inspired scientific effort, and to me it's a compelling piece of conceptual art. It was created literally in just a couple months with no money by a dynamic committee of visionaries. It was led by the astronomer Carl Sagan, Frank Drake, the pioneer in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, was the technical director. Annie Drian was the creative director. Tim Ferriss produced it. John Lomberg was the designer. And Linda Salzman Sagan organized the greetings on the record. The Golden Record tells a story of our planet, expressed through science, through sound, and through images. There's Earth's greatest music. Some people refer to it as the mixtape of planet Earth. From myriad people and cultures, eras, Bach, Blind Willie Johnson, Benin percussion, Solomon Island panpipe music. There's natural sounds collaged together, a baby's cry, a kiss, birds, the wind, the rain. They're cut together in a lovely sound poem called Sounds of Earth, which to me sounds like a piece of avant-garde 1970s tape music. Really stunning. And there's spoken greetings in dozens of human languages, and also one whale language. And there's more than 100 images that are encoded as analog audio signals, kind of like the way a fax machine works, and they're in the grooves of the record. The diagram you see here is the gold-plated aluminum cover of the phonograph record. And these diagrams explain how to play the record and where it came from. And I'll explain it very quickly. I'll just leave this in. At the top left, imagine looking down at a turntable. That's what you see. And there's a cartridge. And that cartridge, the stylus for the turntable that the extraterrestrials would have to build, is tucked inside along with the record. That's a side view of the turntable just below it with some information about timing. In the upper right, going all the way down to that circle, is the explanation of how to decode the images, the audio data, and convert it back, sort of like a TV signal, back into pictures. And the circle is the first picture you'll see if you're doing it right. At the bottom is a hydrogen atom that explains timing and units of measure for the entire record. And in the bottom left is Frank Drake's pulsar map. It explains where we are in the galaxy based on the location of pulsars that are kind of like signposts that point the way toward Earth. And we can talk about that in a little bit. I remember when the Voyager record went up in 1977, and I was 7 years old. And when you're 7 years old and you hear that a group of people made a phonograph record as a message for extraterrestrials, attached it to 2 spaceships, and launched it into space, it sparks the imagination. And it stuck with me through my life. I would think about it frequently. And then in the early 90s, I went to graduate school at UC Berkeley in California to study science journalism under Timothy Ferris. And as I mentioned, Tim Ferris was the producer of the original Voyager record. And I would pepper him with questions about it even then. And I would think about it from time to time. Then a few years ago, I was in Amoeba Music, which is an amazing record store in San Francisco, and I had become friendly with one of the managers there, Tim Daly, who's like a walking encyclopedia, sort of an amateur musicologist about experimental and avant-garde music. And he would recommend records to me, and we would talk about, could we do a project together? And he actually mentioned, wouldn't it be great to do the Voyager record? And I thought, wow, could we do that? And we both stopped for a second and said, no, that would be a rights nightmare, which it actually was. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, but it was very fun. But neither of us could stop thinking about it. And so I reached out to Tim Ferris, who I'd kept in touch with over the years, and we had lunch together. And I proposed to him this idea that we wanted to finally release the Voyager record on vinyl for the very first time. Because in all these years, it had never been out on record, never been able to be played the way it was meant to be played. There was a short-lived CD-ROM version in the early 90s, and there's various versions online pieced together on the net and various pretty terrible quality, including some of the material on NASA's own site. And so I asked Tim Ferris, do you want to be the executive producer? And he said, no, I already made the Voyager record. If you want to make it, you should, though. So we set off on this journey together. And along the way, we realized we wanted, this to be this beautiful object, an objet d'art. And so we contacted my friend Lawrence Azarad. He's a designer of music packaging for Wilco. He did their famous Yankee Hotel Foxtrot cover and many others. He's done projects for Sting and Best Coast and Silver Sun Pickups. And I thought I'd have to explain the Voyager record to him. But he said, I do talks all the time about the Voyager record because it lies at the intersection of music and design, which is his main area of interest. So we had our team lined up, and we launched this project, and the response was absolutely astounding. The Voyager Golden Record 40th Anniversary Edition became the most funded music project in Kickstarter's history. And about a month and a half ago, we won a Grammy for it, which was absolutely mind-blowing. But, the popularity of the project really is a testament to those visionaries I mentioned who created it back in 1977. Earlier, I mentioned that Tim and I were saying that it would be a rights nightmare. We thought it would be, which it was, to collect all of the rights to all of the music that's on the record and all of those images. And it was really an intense journey. A lot of the people would ask me, how did you possibly get Chuck Berry? Because, Johnny B. Good's on the record. That must be so expensive and difficult to get, a hit song like that. Not at all. We worked with a great rights clearinghouse organization called the Rights Workshop, and they have relationships with the major labels. And for those major label tracks, there's a very clear process. The labels have a contract already that they use, and they say, here, this is the contract. There's no discussing the contract, and this is how much it costs, and there's no discussing the price. And if you want it, this is what it is. So we're able to clear those tracks. The real challenge as far as the musical rights go came from the indigenous people's music. Really, my friend Tim Daly described the Voyager record as sort of a proto-world music compilation before world music was even a genre. And the way the music, the indigenous people's music came about is Tim Ferris and Carl Sagan and Annie worked with a group of musicologists and experts of various, musical traditions around the world because they didn't know that kind of material and asked for input. And one of the main people who contributed was the famous musicologist Alan Lomax. So Tim Ferris told me he would go to Alan's apartment and Alan would, say, you got to listen to this. And he would have this rare, like one of a kind shellac record of some vocal music from Russia that someone gave him, and he would fling it like a Frisbee to Tim Ferriss across the room and say, you got to hear that, and, provide this material to him. A lot of what Lomax had was on reel-to-reel tapes. And so when we went looking at the documentation on NASA's site and elsewhere about the making of the original Voyager record, the notes said things like Solomon Island panpipe music provided by the Solomon Island Broadcasting Corporation. And Solomon Islands are this tiny little island. The Broadcasting Corporation is a very small radio station. So we thought, well, there must be more information about this in Alan Lomax's archives, which are in the U.S. Library of Congress. So we went looking at all of them, and we saw scans of the original tape boxes, but there was no information. And we wanted to clear the rights and do this properly, and also provide as much information as we could about the tracks. So we would do things like, I would be calling the Solomon Islands at 2 o'clock in the morning my time, and I called the Solomon Islands Broadcasting Corporation, and the person there said, well, yes, we know that our music that we provide, that came from us is in space, but we have no idea who the performers are, or where it was performed, or when it was performed, or the name of the song, or any information about it at all. Please let us know what you find. So I just started contacting people, academics in the region, who study these different kinds of musics. And I ended up connecting with somebody who does some work. He's at a university in Australia, but he does some work at the radio station looking at, local media and regional media studies. And he happened to be one day at the radio station. He had traveled to the Solomon Islands. And he, regarding that track in particular, he was talking about our project to someone there, and a young woman overheard him. And she said, oh, you're talking about the music in space. My grandfather told me that music actually came from our village, and some of my relatives are the musicians. And let me go talk to my relatives and see what I can find out. And so a few weeks later, we got this beautiful handwritten note that she had taken notes, basically interviewing her relatives about this music. And suddenly we had the names of the performers, several of whom were still living, what the name of the song was. It was called the Megapode Bird, and it's about this beautiful bird on the Solomon Islands, and where it was recorded and why. And we found out that briefly early on it had been used as a jingle on the radio station to, announce that the news was going to be played. And so suddenly we had all this context. And, of course, the next step was we said, well, we'd like to include this on our album. And the response was that they were absolutely thrilled that their culture was represented by this music in space, and they'd be happy to have it on our record. And I said, we'd like to send you some royalty payments. I said, okay, well, next time, we leave the village, we'll try to figure out, about forming a committee, and maybe we can open a bank account, none of which we have right now. And, we'll get back to you. So, but these kinds of connections and these kinds of stories happened throughout the project as I was researching this kind of music. And it also happened with the images. This is an image from a photograph from 1977 of Amal Drake, Frank Drake's wife, who was involved in the image search. And basically what the team did is they went through stacks of National Geographic, photo books, all looking for images that they felt depicted life on Earth. And the images that they selected, none of them were to, the only real rule they had is that none of them were to depict images of violence or aggression or famine or poverty or war. And people often said, well, that means the Voyager record is this utopian view of the planet. Well, of course it is. When you go out and meet somebody, you don't introduce yourself and say, hi, nice to meet you. Would you like to see the skeletons in my closet? You put your best foot forward. And that's what they try to do with these images. So they selected images from all over the place, and they encoded them on audio on the record. And we wanted to present those images at their highest quality in our book. So the first thing that happened is we had to get the images, because the ones that you see online are low res and they're very bad quality. And so we went to NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, to their library, and they provided us with slides. But it turned out those slides were several generations removed from the original, and some of them had weird numbering in them. We thought that was the best we were going to get. And then I happened to have a conversation with Amal Drake here about that, and she said, oh, well, we have the original set of slides in this metal box in our attic. So suddenly we had the original slides and scans of those original slides at extremely high quality, and you can see those in the book accompanying the record. And once we had those images, though, we still didn't have the rights to use them all. And many of the rights were held by, magazines like National Geographic, which owned the rights, or some photo agencies. But many were owned by the individual photographers who took the photos. So how do we get the rights to those? So we knew the names of the photographers from the original documentation when they made the record. So I started just looking up online, trying to track these people down. And a lot of them have passed on. I was looking at obituaries and finding family members and contacting them. And every time I got through to somebody who, was the child of somebody who was photographed or something, they would say how excited and how much the project, being included on the Voyager record meant to their family member. And, we would pay some fee and license the image. But it wasn't as easy as it sounds, because for almost every one, I would probably call 5 to 10 different people who were the wrong people. And you can imagine me calling and saying, hi, I think that you may have taken a photograph that's on the Voyager record, which is traveling through space right now, and I was hoping to license that image. And then I get a hang up, But there were also some wonderful stories that came about. This image here, which is a photograph that was taken at the United Nations School for Children, where many of the delegates, children, would go. And you can see some people are in traditional dress from their cultures. And the story was that a photographer who was working for UNICEF at the time, Ruby Mara, had been asked by somebody associated with the project if they could go take a picture at the school of some children. I tried and tried every angle I could, and I could not find this Ruby Mara. And that was an example where I had a week-long back and forth with somebody who I thought was a relative to find out I was totally talking to the wrong person. But then eventually I found somebody who seemed to be a relative, and he worked for Adobe, and I reached out to him via LinkedIn. And I explained our project and said, I think that a relative of yours may have taken this picture. And he said, oh, yeah, my mom took the picture. And in fact, if you look at the picture, I'm the boy smiling in the middle. And there were multiple stories like that. And they were incredibly moving. So while, as I said, it was a rights nightmare in many ways, it was also like a dream, because as a journalist, my background's in journalism, it was great fun to try to track all this information down. And honestly, one of the things that we're most proud of around our box set is the audio track list, because it lists, I think, as much information that can be known about these recordings, and also the correct information about the photographers who took these stunning images. When I first met with Tim Ferriss, the original producer, about this project, he said to me, well, one of the first things you're going to need to do is get the masters, the original audio masters. The reel-to-reel tapes that they made in 1977 that they then cut the record from. And Tim Daly and I sort of thought, yeah, we're probably never going to get that. We'll probably piece it together from various sources and sort of do the best we can. And then, in production, we'll try to make it sound good. But then every few months, Tim Ferriss would email me and say, you find those masters yet? Any luck on those masters? And I felt like I was back in school, and that was my professor sort of asking me where my paper was. And eventually we reached out to the archivists at Sony Music. And the story was that in 1977, when they actually produced the record and made this record, CBS Records donated the recording studio to actually mix the record, the engineering, which included Jimmy Iovine, who went on to own Beats and do many other amazing album projects. And when they cut the record and finished creating it, CBS Records said, okay, well, we'll just go ahead and take these tapes and put them in our archive. And the archive is actually an underground bunker in a converted iron mine in Pennsylvania. So for 40 years, these tapes sat in their archives in this iron mine. And when I finally reached the Sony archivist, who was familiar with the Voyager Record project and in fact had seen, announcements of ours, he said, yeah, we probably have them maybe, but I can't seem to find them because they're not labeled or organized under the same system as our commercial releases. So I have no idea what they would be filed under. And eventually, do his due diligence, amazing, Matt Kelly, the archivist, found them filed under the name NASA Project. So I'm taking my kids to school, and I get an email after I drop them off, and it's a photo of the tape boxes on Matt Kelly's desk. And this is one of them right there. And you can see it says NASA, Sounds of the Earth, and it's some timing and mixing instructions going on, return to Sony Music Vault. So what happened is, after he had the tapes, Tim Ferriss, Tim Daly, and I, and Tim Ferriss's son Patrick, who's a musician and a music historian, went to New York City to Sony Music's historic Battery Mastering Studio, where some of the most famous records of all time have been mastered. And the tapes were there. And we walked in, and Tim Ferriss hadn't seen these tapes in 40 years, and he suddenly sees his handwriting and notes. He says that's Annie Drian, Sagan's widow's handwriting, with some timing information. And the tapes are there. But with tapes that old, especially from certain brands, they degrade rapidly and irrevocably over time. So what the engineer did for us is he baked the tapes, which literally means putting the tapes in an oven and cooking them for a certain very careful period of time so that the magnetic material stays on, because otherwise it would flake off when you put it on the machine, long enough to make a very high resolution digital transfer. And so that's what we did. So he put the tapes on this beautiful, vintage reel-to-reel tape machine, and we sat there and listened to it together. And as the sounds of the blues and the Benin percussion and Bach and the Solomon Island panpipes and Johnny B. Good washed over us, it was really a sublime experience. And at the end of the final song, as the Budapest String Quartet faded out, Tim Ferriss just looked over at me and he said, "It's a pretty good record, isn't it?" I said, "Yeah, it's a pretty good record." So we had the beautiful audio quality of the original masters in order to make our record. And then when we actually went to cut the record, we went to Los Angeles to Bernie Grundman. And Bernie Grundman is the famed, if you're in the industry, mastering engineer who engineered Thriller and Aja and all these, Dr. Dre's The Chronic and all these amazing records. And so we spent a day with him as he tweaked the knobs to make it sound as beautiful as it does. For me, the Voyager record lies at the intersection of my lifelong love of art and music and science with the work that I do at Institute for the Future, which is a nonprofit think tank in Palo Alto where I'm a researcher. The first law of futures thinking is that there are no facts about the future. There are only fictions. The future is a place where anything is possible, even if it's not probable. Futures thinking is fueled by wonder and curiosity. And most importantly, I think futures thinking is a inherently hopeful practice. It connects us to our humanity. And those are all things that I think the Voyager record does. People have often asked, me since this project started, why I think that the Voyager record resonated so much. Is it this sort of vintage nostalgia trip to an era of wide-eyed optimism? And I don't think that's the case. I think the Voyager record is perhaps more relevant now than it was when it launched in 1977. The Voyager record is a time capsule, but it's also timeless. It sparks the imagination. It lies at the intersection of science and art to instill a sense of wonder about the universe. In fact, the Voyager record may be the last vestige of our civilization after we're gone forever. It's already the furthest human-made artifact in space. And it provokes us to think about the future and our civilization's place in it, I think. And most importantly, I think the Voyager record exudes a sense of hope for a better tomorrow. So let's take a couple minutes and experience what's in those grooves. This is just a sampling. The audio you'll hear is just short bits of the tracks, but the record has the full tracks of all the songs.
As the Secretary General of the United Nations, I send greetings on behalf of the people of our planet.
Salutări la toată lumea. Bonjour tout le monde. 各位好嗎？祝各位平安健康快樂。
Hello from the children of planet Earth.